Hey guys, this is Riley with Romeo Hotel Engineering. I recently got a few questions about why I set my shotgun up like I did, and I wanted to just take some time to make a quick video about it and answer some of those in detail instead of trying to answer everyone's questions individually. So, starting out at the muzzle, we can address the elephant in the room. Obviously, I've added a double barrel shotgun silencer, which my company makes and produces and sells. It's called the DP-12, and it's available for pre-order for the second batch of production right now on my website. So if you're interested, let me know and we can get you set up with that pre-order deposit and go ahead and move forward from there. Obviously, in order to install that shotgun silencer, I had to remove the factory choke tubes. So these are what came in the gun, installed flush with the barrels. Just to let you know, I didn't have the spreader or breacher chokes, which extend a little bit further forward. It was just the flush fitting chokes. Coming back a little bit, if we tackle this Grand Thumb style, going from tip to butt, we have the handguard area, and immediately you'll notice that the factory DP-12 grip has been removed, and it's been replaced with a Magpul angle forward grip. And the main reason I did this is to deal with the weight of the silencer. Not only having that extra weight on the gun makes it heavier, obviously, but what it does mostly is it shifts that center of gravity further forward. And when you have a gun that was incredibly well balanced, that being a bullpup, around the pistol grip initially, now you take that center of gravity and move it a bit further forward out. And what I found is changing the grip so that you're not holding your wrist in a vertical position and you can now roll your wrist a bit more. It helps change the muscles that are engaged, especially up in your shoulder area, that make this a bit less fatiguing to shoulder and shoot over time. So that helps there. You'll probably also notice a distinct lack of a weapon mounted light, and I use Streamlight weapon lights on plenty of my guns, and I haven't quite set one up for this yet, mainly because this handguard is not M-LOK. It uses Magpul's MOE legacy kind of slots, as you can see here on this pick rail segment. So eventually I'd like to get something set up where I can either use a tape switch or something with a optic or a weapon light here. But I've also considered pulling this factory handguard off and designing and producing a new handguard which would use M-LOK slots in place of these legacy MOE slots. So I don't know how much interest there would be in something like that. I might just do it for myself to have it, but it's on the table for sure. Otherwise, I'll probably just use this pick rail to mount that weapon light and go from there. Moving a bit further back, you'll notice up here I added a Magpul QD sling point, which mounts to the 1913 top rail. And what's great about this is I use my slings interchangeably on a few different of my guns. So instead of having to buy a bunch of slings and worry about them getting tangled up in my safe, spending that extra money, I can just quickly swap them out with a push of a button to pull this out and replace it. Speaking of slings, what I've used on this for the longest time now is a Viking Tactics VTAC sling. It's worked really well, especially on this heavier gun, having the 2-point setup. Now, ideally, I would have my front sling point a bit further out, but what I wanted to make sure I did was keep that sling out of the way when I'm running the action. Because this is a pump action, I come all the way back here with my support hand, and I just don't want to get tangled up in the sling every time I do that. Especially when the sling's under tension. It just ends up being an obstacle and it can induce malfunctions. So, moving back a bit more, we've got the Optic here. And I went with the See All Sights night sight, and I really like this, especially for shotguns, because it gives me a reflex capability and it's entirely self-powered. So it's got fiber optics in there that help take advantage of the daylight to light up your reticle, and in low light conditions it's also tritium lit, so it lights up very well. You can see the reticle great. And I'll throw a picture up of that here, but I just have the Chevron or Delta reticle in it, and I've got it zeroed for 50 yards using slugs shooting from the right barrel, which is the first trigger pull of the two when you're firing this. And I can hit headshots all day on silhouette targets zeroed like that. And the great part is too, shooting buckshot, which I primarily shoot, within those 50 yards, I'm on target with every shot. Doesn't matter if it's the right barrel or the left. There's a slight point of impact shift, but it's nothing to really worry about, especially shooting buckshot. You're going to make connection with your target. An electro-optic didn't quite make sense to me, although I do think a custom EOTech would be awesome on this, which I'll throw a picture up here really quick. Now, one thing that the DP-12 is kind of unique for is that there's not much of a relief for your cheek, getting a cheek weld on this. So I had to raise this optic up a little bit higher in order to get a good sight picture with it. And I used a Monstrum Tactical riser, which is kind of a cop-out on my part. Not exactly the highest quality, but it definitely gets the job done. It's got a little QD lever on here, which I take this optic off and reinstall it all the time. Its return to zero has been great over the years. The only complaint I have about this riser is the roll pin that shipped with the mount originally was just a split pin. So it kind of got deformed pretty quickly after a bit of use, and I swapped it out for a coiled heavy-duty roll pin. Ever since I've done that, I've had really good results using this optic, just throwing it on and off over the years. So speaking of ammunition that I use with this thing, a lot of folks will tout, Federal's flight controlled buckshot as the standard or the go-to, that it patterns very tightly, and it's comfortable to use out of most shotguns in terms of recoil. And I started studying different 12 gauge loads a bit more in detail, and I quickly found that these are pretty much on the lower end of the spectrum of what 12 gauge is ultimately capable of. I did a bit more research into this, and I ultimately went and found this Winchester XX. Now this is buckshot that shoots 12 pellets, and it's a much higher velocity than the Federal, but being 3 inches, it takes your overall capacity on the shotgun from 16 down to 14. So with shooting this Federal, you can get 16 rounds on there, and that's a total kinetic energy of 22,500 versus 14 rounds of the Winchester 3-inch buckshot, which ends up being a total capacity of 42,000 foot-pounds. So you get a lot more bang for your buck using this ammo. It is more expensive, but if your intention is to, use lethal force, in my mind, it makes more sense to maximize that damage potential instead of, limiting yourself for whatever reason. And recoil-wise, these do have a bit more recoil, but the shotgun is set up very well to handle that. When you have the addition and the weight of the silencer, as well as the spring-loaded butt pad on the rear end, it soaks up that recoil like nothing. So I could shoot these all day comfortably without having any issue, aside from the added cost of spending all that on the ammunition. Now I will say too, I am working on some reloads of double-aught buckshot to be set up specifically to be subsonic. And this will kind of lower that damage potential like I talked about, but for range days or for situations where you anticipate shooting in tight hallways or small confined spaces, this is going to be much better on your ears, especially when combined with this silencer. So it'll be something that you can use to ultimately avoid using hearing protection with, and should make it a bit more comfortable. Now this will drop that lethality a bit, like I was talking about. So we said this is 22,500 fully loaded, 44,000 fully loaded, 42,000 fully loaded rather. This would come down to 19,000 foot-pounds of energy on board with 16 shells of this subsonic buckshot. So a little bit of a compromise, but you end up getting something that's a lot quieter and, you know, ultimately more comfortable to shoot. So coming a bit further back, we have this adapter that I found online, and really all this does is it takes a swivel sling mount and converts it to accept a QD cup. So you can take your QD sling and just plug it right in there. You're good to go. The only other thing I did to this is I added a strip of Velcro around the outside diameter, and you can probably see some of the wear that was forming. That's just from this sling mount rubbing along the receiver. So it's not going to really hurt anything, but I just didn't want to wear away at it for no good reason. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. So this is basically everything that I've changed or modified on this gun over the years. Yeah, that's it. Fuck me, I fucking forgot.